The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Wisconsin.
What is art's role in a democratic society? Although we obviously have a strong right to freedom of expression in this country, art and artists may be constrained in other ways. We'll discuss the role arts play in a vibrant democracy. Next, during office hours. Hi, I'm Ken Goldstein, professor in the Department of Political Science at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Today we'll be talking about art's role in promoting freedom in a democracy. We'll explore examples of controversial art in America, First Amendment issues that arise from these controversies, and discuss the role of arts and the humanities in education at all levels. Joining us today to discuss these topics is Caroline Levine. Levine is a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin and is author of the book Provoking Democracy: Why We Need the Arts. Her research aims to bridge the gap between historical, political approaches to culture and more traditional techniques of literary formalism. Her current work includes an analysis of HBO's television series, The Wire. Caroline, thanks so much for joining us on Office Hours.
Great to be here.
So, I guess conventional wisdom would be that the arts need a vibrant democracy to survive, or they wouldn't have the freedom to do what artists do. You're turning that causality a little bit on its head and making an argument that actually democracy also needs the arts.
Yeah, we're used to thinking about totalitarian societies as the ones that clamp down on artists, like the Nazis or the Stalinists or the Taliban destroying the great Buddhist sculptures in Afghanistan. But in fact, democracies are equally capable of squelching the arts and need artists to provoke and needle them into becoming truly vibrant and healthy societies. At least that's what I started to believe as I was doing my research. I didn't begin with that hypothesis, but I started to think democracies are organized around majorities, and majorities can be perfectly capable of squelching outsider, dissident voices, marginal expression. And so artists are the ones, in part, at least since the late 19th century, who started to guarantee that position in a democracy of the outsider, the one who will speak against dominant norms and majority tastes and values.
So we're going to spend most of our time here discussing how they do that. But I'm going to get off track here, but this is not your grandmother's English book. I took high school English. I took a class or two in English in college where we read Shakespeare and Moby Dick and analyzed what was going on in the characters. It doesn't sound like your normal project that an English professor would do. I guess two questions. How'd you fall into doing this? And am I wrong about what I think about English professors? I mean, that could be the other problem going on here.
Right. Let me answer them in order. I got interested in this exactly in English classes. That is, I was teaching students about literature and started to worry that literature might not have a social value. You know, we like to think of it as somehow important, but how important is it? And you as a political scientist might say, it's not that important, right? It's marginal. And I started to lose faith in the traditional justifications that people give for the arts, like it enriches us or it uplifts us, it makes us better human beings. I wasn't sure that any of those really worked, so I started to look at the ways that people justify the arts, and that's what got me into this research, thinking about what is it that art is for. And the most consistent argument, at least for me, that seemed the most persuasive, was this idea that art challenges us, it provokes us, and that may have a value very specifically in modern democracies that I hadn't paid any attention to before. So I kind of got myself onto this track by the sense of doubt I was having in my classes. But the other thing that you say about do English professors do this kind of thing? I think increasingly we're asking ourselves these kinds of questions. What role does art play in a society that we should think about, not take for granted, not send out as platitudes, you know, art is universal, art is good for everybody, art is humanizing, but really, what is it for and how does it work? I
think one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on was to have this discussion about why the humanities are important at a world-class institution. And you obviously believe they are, I believe they are, but I think it's the case. We too often fall back on these platitudes.
Right. Right. And that's why I got excited enough to write a book about it, because I thought, oh, maybe we should actually pay attention to the ways that artists and for me, those who study the arts, especially the ones who are kind of thinking at the cutting edge, are challenging our culture to become a more plural, more heterogeneous, more, I want to say, mature kind of society, that by being able to be challenged and provoked, we become a better, healthier democracy in the process. So if that's true, then arts are, and those who study the arts are absolutely at the center of a democratic society and not marginal at all.
Panel is really, really interesting. We're going to come right back on office hours, and we're going to continue our discussion of arts and democracy as we welcome an English professor to office hours, and might even welcome an English professor into political science. So hope you'll stay with us on office hours.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
For more than 100 years, the University of Wisconsin has been inspired by the Wisconsin idea,
which says the good work of the university extends to the boundaries of the state and beyond.
So the UW works hard to help build Wisconsin's economy.
Educate people of all ages.
Advance health and medicine.
And enhance the quality of life for all of us.
Hit it!
The University of Wisconsin-Madison. Forward thinking.
Welcome back to Office Hours. We're with Caroline Levine, who is a professor of English here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we are discussing arts and democracy. So one of the great things about great things for me that I get to do this is I get to engage and read lots of things that I wouldn't normally read. And so as I was reading your book, I was reading about the avant-garde movement. And got to be honest, I thought that was a T-shirt. I didn't know what that meant. People are always saying avant-garde, but it actually has a history and a meaning which is very core to your argument.
Yeah, I was pretty fascinated by the story of the avant-garde, and I started to realize that its history was bound up in the history of modern democracy in a way that I hadn't seen other people talk about. So up until the 19th century, the artist's major patron is usually a king or a pope in Western society, and so artists are always having to please their patrons. In the middle of the 19th century, you get a kind of explosion of media. You get books, print, newspapers, photography, and suddenly everybody starts to be able to have access to cultural objects. Then comes a new question. If culture is democratic, if everybody can read books and see works of visual art, is there a danger that it's going to start homogenizing everybody? We're all going to become standardized. And so groups of artists, small groups of artists in the late 19th century start to say, we better not join this kind of homogenizing, standardizing mass culture. We better stand outside it and make sure that there's always a challenge to it, a kind of unsettling of people's preconceptions. Otherwise, they're going to get lulled and complacent. And so they took on this idea of themselves as avant-garde, actually from a military context. It means the front line or vanguard. And so they saw themselves fighting for culture, fighting even for thinking, for thought, for excitement against the deadening forces of homogenization. And that definition of art as standing outside of mainstream culture and challenging us has only since the 19th century really become a core part of the definition of art. So one of the things I learned doing my research was that art hasn't always been defined that way. Sometimes we say, oh yeah, art is always supposed to challenge you. But really, it's a pretty recent definition and bound up with this question of democratization.
You discuss that in the book, and it's really interesting. Art, we always think art's in opposition, and art is the brilliant, tortured artist, and that really wasn't the case until 100 years ago.
Right, not much more than 100 years ago.
Interesting. What's also interesting is we have all these debates now about the homogenization of the mass culture, and we think those are not just discussions we've had since the advent of cable television.
Oh, right. I think the internet is a new revolution in thinking about how we get access to cultural objects and how we get access to our ideas, but a similar revolution, equally, if not possibly more revolutionary, happened in the mid-19th century when suddenly people can read books, people can get access to information and ideas in a way that they've never done before.
But some of this avant-garde stuff, and you talk about this, it's a little precious too, right? This whole thing, you know, I'd be horrified if someone applauds my performance.
Right.
There's this quote, the horror of immediate success.
Success, right.
So on the one hand, I was like, please.
Yeah, I know, it gets tiring in a way, but what's surprising to me is that willingness constantly to stand on the margins, always to try to find the fringes or the margins, is what keeps us vibrant. Without that, we just get tired, we get, what's the word, we get kind of complacent, we get boring.
So give me a couple examples of some big scandals at the turn of the century. They're Mapplethorpe's.
They're Mapplethorpe's, yeah, sure. So one of my favorite cases in terms of what it teaches or taught me as I was reading about it was from 1925. An American sculptor was commissioned in London to do a sculpture in Hyde Park, so a big kind of public space, symbolic national public space. And the sculpture he produced was avant-garde in style, but not shocking on the grounds of religion or sex or politics, nothing like that. It was a mythological figure in a kind of stark, sharp kind of style, unfamiliar, not quite realistic style. And there was a huge outcry, huge. Letters to the newspapers, debates in Parliament about whether to tear the thing down, protests, and fascists wrote on it in green paint. And they particularly singled out the Jewish identity of this American sculptor. Now, what I thought was interesting about this...
Let me stop you
there.
Sure. We're going to jump in, because we are actually on TV. We're going to go to a commercial, and then we'll come back, and I want to hear more about the story of... the sculptor was Epstein, correct?
Jacob Epstein.
Jacob Epstein.
Yep.
Please, stay with us on Office Hours. Welcome back to Office Hours. We're talking about art and democracy with Professor Caroline Levine from the Department of English at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So, I interrupted you. You were telling the story about a sculptor, Jacob Epstein.
Jacob Epstein. So he's the subject of this tremendous turmoil, this outcry. And it seems really important to me that it's basically on the grounds of his style. People keep saying, this is not English enough. This doesn't belong in an English public park. So it's an outsider work. And as a result, we want to see it destroyed. And that made me realize that public opinion in a democracy is not the opposite of fascism, as we might like to think, but on a continuum with fascism. That the fascists who wanted to see it destroyed, the characteristically fascist desire to quell outsiders and dissidents and foreigners, was exactly what the majority was mobilizing in that instance. And so Epstein becomes a figure for this kind of outsider dissenting voice, even though he's not upsetting people on the grounds that we usually think of people, artists troubling people. It's not
who
obscene.
He is, not what he's doing.
Right, well, it's the style also. It's not even just his identity, although I think that certainly mobilized people, but it was that people felt that this work didn't fit in. It didn't fit their idea of what was standard or mainstream. So,
and again, forgive me for being the political science here, but all the isms, Impressionism, and all the, those were not popular at the time.
No, that's right, that's right. So Impressionism is a great example of something that, if we think of it now as just pretty and serene, and we love to put it on our walls of our dorm rooms, in the 1870s and 80s, it was shocking, and people were outraged by it because it was literally breaking apart the conventions of painting. It was saying, what is color? What is light? What is perception? And
Van Gogh, Monet, were they trying to anger, or that's just what they wanted to do? Would they have liked to have been liked?
That's a good question.
Not that we can go back and ask them.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question in the sense that I think we tend to think, as a mainstream society, we tend to think that artists are just out there to goad us. And I think that's true, but I think every artist I know is also on a kind of sincere quest for understanding and trying to think in new ways and trying to take apart conventions and trying not just to put one over on people or to prod them or to upset them, but actually to try to refresh his or her vision, his or her perception. And so I think the Impressionists were first and foremost doing that. But I don't think they minded so much that they unsettled people either.
What, not expecting a number, but what's the denominator here? What proportion of artists do you think are out there saying, who are doing the logic of avant-garde and how it relates from art and democracy in your argument, who are saying, I need to goad, I need to be, I need to be provocative. Others are saying, I just want to sell some art.
Right.
Or others are saying, well, no one liked my art.
I better give up.
I better give up.
Right. You know, you're the quantitative guy, so I think I have to leave the denominator question to you. But one thing that I was interested in doing
I asked
research,
because we end up paying attention to the big deals, right?
Right.
We can talk about Mapplethorpe, we can talk about a particular play. Most plays don't generate tons of controversy. Most art exhibits don't generate tons of controversy.
A part of what interested me doing my research was that every artist, it seemed like, that I looked at who was ever under attack, even if they were working in folk styles or rap or hip hop, you know, even if they weren't what we think of as avant-garde artists, would adopt this argument that they were supposed to provoke us when they were under attack. So I think it's not only that there are artists out there trying to goad us and then we attack and then they say, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to do, but there are artists who are just doing their thing, trying to figure out how to see the world in the best way they can. They goad us because it's unfamiliar and uncomfortable, and then they say, well, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Isn't that what art is?
Now, in terms of your argument, I mean, is that an important distinction? Because it seems to me to be a really interesting distinction because sometimes these controversies can feel a bit manufactured.
Right.
I remember when I worked, we're gonna have to come back, but let me ask the question and let you answer it in the next segment. I remember when I was working in the news and flag burning was big, and it was just completely staged, right? Someone would come and call the newsroom and burn a flag, and then a bunch of people would run out and they'd get arrested, and we'd go through this predictable fashion. But what you seem to be talking about is something a little bit different.
Yes,
and when we come
so.
back, I'm going to let you tell me if that's something different.
Terrific.
Hope you'll stay with us on Office Hours.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
Welcome back to Office Hours with Caroline Levine of the Department of English at University of Wisconsin. So, does it matter for your argument if someone needles on purpose or needles by accident?
I think that's such an important question because I think when we get into the habit of saying, oh, it's art, it's provoking us again, that's so boring, we've actually not been provoked. It's a way to avoid being provoked. And so if we think about the infinite number of ways we could be provoked to see things in a new way, I don't think we'd close down that quickly. We would open ourselves up to the possibility that that provocation is a good one and that maybe we should stop and think about it. So I think it's really important, not so much the intention of the artist as our own reaction to the sense of being repeatedly provoked. I don't think we should get bored with that. I think we should stay alert to it and welcoming of it. And I include myself in that. I have been provoked. It's not that I like all of this art. I find it sometimes disturbing also. So I'm not just preaching to others. I think I need to take my own lessons seriously.
Let's talk for a second about Jackson Pollock, one of the provocative artists in his very different style. I never had heard this and read it in your book, that he was funded by the
CIA.
Now, why was the CIA funding Jackson Pollock?
Well, this is such a great story, and it's been, it's not my own research, it's been talked about by other scholars, but in the 1940s, the U.S. was being attacked by the Soviet Union for being a shallow, materialist culture that was homogenizing everybody. And the Soviets said, that's not a country capable of a real culture. And actually, at the time, we were doing pretty badly at being a country capable of a real culture. So there was a great art show in 1947 called Advancing American Art, which had these great artists, Georgia O'Keeffe and Jacob Lawrence and Robert Motherwell, and was touring Latin America and Eastern Europe, and people were saying, wow, the US has better art than we thought it did. And Congress made this huge outcry and said, you got to shut down the show, this abstraction, that's communist art. We got to get rid of it. So it was very embarrassing. It had to be closed down, and it looked like we really weren't a country capable of culture. So what are you going to do if you want to persuade the world that we're a genuinely free society and open to these experimental artists who are testing the boundaries of what's ordinary and familiar? Well, the CIA comes up with this kind of sneaky plan that they're going to fund the abstract expressionists who are doing this kind of wild, expressive art that people hate. They call Jackson Pollock Jack the Dripper, and he's reviled widely. And you say, well, if we promote him publicly, but under cover of secrecy, if we give him exhibitions, we show him worldwide, people will say, wow, what a free society. They let people like this guy show his art. And so using a bunch of front organizations, including to some extent the Museum of Modern Art in New York, they managed to promote the abstract expressionists from more or less obscurity to international renown. So it was quite a move, and it was a move precisely designed to show that art is a kind of bellwether of the freedom of a society, a democratic society.
Well, this is absolutely an amazing story. We don't have very much time left at all, about 45 seconds. I just want to ask you something that you mentioned before. Is there any line? Can something just be bad? Can someone just be a jerk?
Yes, the answer is yes, but we don't know that until we've had a debate about it. So I don't think we can close down the discussion. I think we have to open ourselves up to that, and sometimes that's difficult.
Well, Carolyn, thanks so much for joining us on Office Hours. We've got the book here. We can see if our viewers can see it, and I read it, and it is beautifully written and very interesting. Didn't agree with it all, but I thought it was just terrific, and also led to lots of interesting conversations. So please join us on Office Hours the next time. Check us out on the web at officehours.poli-sci.wisc.edu. Thanks for stopping by.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Wisconsin in association with the Big Ten Network.